Yeah, hello, welcome everyone. My name once again is Maruf Akinwale Oladejo. I am from the Department of Educational Management, University of Lagos, Lagos, Nigeria. Today, I want to be speaking on the applications of a school mapping exercise in diverse education areas. School mapping exercise is a valuable tool for identifying areas of need and for allocating resources more effectively regardless of the prevailing educational situations in the area that it is being applied. And basically, when we are talking about application of a school mapping exercise, there are five major areas that we always consider. The first one is educationally advanced areas, educationally disadvantaged or backward areas, areas undergoing structural reforms, sparsely populated areas, and of course, densely populated areas. By providing stakeholders with data and insights, school mapping can help to ensure that education resources are distributed in a manner that supports the successful attainment of students' academic as well as institutional educational goals. And like I said, these five areas that I've mentioned are what I want to be talking on in order to see how we can conveniently, apply school mapping exercise in each and every one of them. Don't forget that school mapping, you know, is highly needed in order to correct whatever inequalities that we might notice, you know, in access to educational provisions or whatever disparities that we might, see in resource distribution, resource allocation, resource utilization. So all these are what we want to be speaking on and how we can, use school mapping exercise in each and every areas that I've mentioned. Now, first and foremost, I want to be speaking on educationally backward or educationally disadvantaged areas. And for us to be able to identify such areas, there are certain features that characterized these areas. The first one is that any area that is regarded as educationally backward, would be the area that is having limited access to educational resources. Limited access to educational resources. In fact, not only educational resources, even basic amenities, electricity, pipe-borne water, good roads. So these areas, they are having limited access to all these resources. Educationally backward areas also have low levels of educational achievement. Low levels of educational achievement. In other words, the kind of education that usually though take place in educationally backward or disadvantaged areas are in most cases quality, of low quality, maybe because of absence of uh, good resources that can engender quality education. Educationally backward or disadvantaged areas are also characterized by low enrollment and participation rates. You know, it could be because probably the children there are not usually being motivated, or the parents there, they do not value education, so to say. So it now translates into a situation whereby there will be low enrollment, there will be a very low participation rate. The rate at which children or pupils participate in schools, enroll in schools, will be drastically low. So in summary, educationally backward areas are areas that are typically, you know, they typically have under-resourced schools. They usually have poorly qualified teachers. And like I said, they may have a culture that does not prioritize education. And when that happens, the people living there, they may not, value, they may not attach, value or seriousness to anything that is education. So these are characteristics, of a educationally backward or disadvantaged area. Now, how can we use school mapping exercise, in these areas? How can we use it? So, what are the areas? What, is the relevance of school mapping exercise in any area, that is backward, educationally? The first one is we can use school mapping to increase the rate of enrollment and participation. In one of my previous videos, I made it known that school mapping exercise is something that should be done, you know, at the beginning of every academic section. This is to enable us, identify the issue of disparity, the issue of inequality, so that we can take appropriate steps. So in educationally backward areas, we can use school mapping to increase the enrollment rate because we have identified the fact that in those areas, enrollment and participation rates are usually, very low. So how do we do this? We can put in place certain policies, certain programs that will motivate both the parents and the children or the pupils, to show keen interest, positive interest in education. And when that happens, enrollment rates, participation rates would increase. We can also use school mapping exercise to identify areas where there is shortage of qualified teachers or lack of resources, which can inform hiring decisions and resource allocation. I need to quickly say that educationally backward areas or disadvantaged area usually have uh, I mean poor or unqualified, not that they are not qualified, but let me just say poorly qualified teachers, you know, poorly in the sense that the resources that they also need to be able to offer quality, service are not usually available in educationally disadvantaged areas because there is lack of resources. And by applying school mapping exercise, we can now, have opportunity to take decisions regarding the kinds or the types of teachers that we need to hire, to employ, and the resource allocation pattern that we need to, put in place because we have identified, the fact that educational disadvantaged areas, they have limited access to resources. Then we can use school mapping exercise to also identify areas, within educationally disadvantaged community. We can use school mapping exercise to identify areas for infrastructure upgrades and renovations. Infrastructure upgrades and renovations. We are not saying that those areas do not have resources. They have schools, they have teachers, but very, very limited. And when we are able to, identify use school mapping to identify areas that need infrastructure upgrades, that need renovation, then it can help us to improve on the learning environment and support student success. By the time we are able to, upgrade the infrastructure, by the time we're able to renovate schools as a result of the school mapping exercise that we had carried out, then there is tendency that It will help to improve the learning environment and support students' success. Now, uh, the last uh, way by which we can apply school mapping exercise, or that makes school mapping exercise to be relevant in educationally backward areas, is for us to be able to identify uh, students who may be at risk of dropping out. Regionally, there is low enrollment, there is low participation rates. So those that are there, those pupils that are still, trying to get education, there could be some of them that will be at the risk of dropping out. But when we use school mapping exercise, when we carry out school mapping exercise, we will be able to identify those students that may be at risk of dropping out so that we can come up with appropriate policies or programs that would uh, enable us to be able to prevent this kind of educational wastage. It is when we carry out school mapping exercise that we will be able to address this. Uh, then the other areas that we can talk about the applications of school mapping exercise is the educationally advanced areas. Educationally advanced areas. Of course, um, they share the opposite characteristics of the educationally backward or disadvantaged areas. For example, educationally advanced areas have high levels of educational achievements. Schools there usually do well, probably because they have uh, access to resources. So, educationally advanced areas, they have access to, they have access to, resources that are very relevant, to improve the educational achievement of the school or the academic performance of the pupils. So, educationally advanced areas, they are areas that are typically having well-resourced schools. They have highly qualified teachers and a culture of valuing education. They value education. They attach, seriousness to the education of the children in such areas. Now, uh, the educationally advanced areas, in spite of being advanced, one may still be wondering how can we, you know, uh, apply school mapping exercise in these areas of what relevance again? Because the areas are advanced educationally already. So, of what essence do we still need to carry out school mapping exercise? School mapping exercise is still relevant in educationally advanced areas because we can use it to identify, areas where there are still gaps in access to high quality education. If I'm using Lagos State, Nigeria as an example, Lagos State is an educationally advanced state when we compare it with other states of the federation. But in spite of that, we still have some areas in Lagos State where they do not have access to high quality education. It is in Lagos State that we have uh, uh, the Lagos Island, where we have the highly paying, schools. And in this same area, we have areas that, they are still having access to high quality education, but not as they have in some areas like Highland and other areas in some parts of the state. So What I'm saying in essence is that even though Lagos State, as an example, is an educationally advanced state, there are still gaps. We still have some people that do not have access to high quality education. So we still need, school mapping in this regard. We need school mapping in this regard. Now, Lagos State is divided into different education districts, six in number, so to say. So there are some districts that are having access to high quality education. There are some districts that are having access to quality education. So we need school mapping exercise to still bridge this, gap that we noticed, because we are talking about using school mapping exercise to correct inequalities, in access to educational opportunities. We can use school mapping exercise to identify underserved or disadvantaged populations that may require targeted interventions. You know, when we carry out school mapping exercise, there is tendency for us to have access to information regarding the underserved, regarding the disadvantaged population, be it children with special needs, be it women, be it girl child, or children in the streets. All these are typical examples of disadvantaged populations. So, and they are also available. They are also, in educationally advanced areas. So we need school mapping exercise to be able to identify this special category of population, so that we will be able to come up with uh, interventions or policies that will target at these categories of people. Educationally advanced areas also need school mapping exercise for us to be able to identify areas where there may be opportunities for innovations, such as the implementation of new programs or the expansion of the existing programs. You know, uh, the areas are advanced, but there will always be room, room for improvements, room for improvement. So, where we have high quality education, how do we sustain such education? What other opportunities are open for innovations, especially in this era of technology? Then, what about, looking at the possibility of implementing new programs, the possibility of expanding the existing programs, so that everybody will continue to have access to high quality education. So school mapping exercise is very, very relevant in this area. And of course, we might have, introduced some educational initiatives, you know, across the states. So, but in advanced areas, educationally advanced areas, we can use school mapping exercise to evaluate the success or otherwise of the educational initiatives that we have already, put in place, and of course, which will give us a leverage to be able to identify areas where improvements can be made. We have, introduced a particular educational initiative aims at sustaining the high quality education in educationally advanced areas. We may carry out school mapping exercise to evaluate how far we have been able to attain the objectives of this educational initiative, so that we can have, an insight into areas that may require further improvement. The next area that I want to talk on is those areas that are undergoing structural reforms. Areas that are undergoing structural reforms. Now, there are some areas that are experiencing significant changes in their educational system. These changes are driven either by policy reforms or by shifting demographics or any other factors. But the bottom line here is that if we are talking about areas that are undergoing structural reforms, they will be those areas that are experiencing significant changes as far as the system of education in such areas, are concerned. And the changes could be as a result of policy reforms. A governor might have, you know, policy different from his predecessor. I remember in Oyo State, the then governor, one of the former governors, Governor Rashid Ladoja, you know, uh, followed or implemented that ratio 1 to 30 pupil, teacher pupil ratio. And as at that time, that policy led to reorganization of schools, creation of additional schools, you know, from the existing schools. And of course, it also led to the promotion of some people to be the school principals. So that is a typical example of areas that are undergoing structural reforms because there are significant changes in the education system of those areas that are driven by policy reforms. Now, we also have uh, uh, in those areas there is, high. Uh, we can say there is high uh, school participation rate to some extent, and that could be why there is the need for that reform. But at this juncture, how can we, apply school mapping exercise? For what reasons? What is the relevance of school mapping exercise, in areas that are undergoing structural reforms? One, we can use school mapping exercise to identify areas that require targeted interventions and support to ensure that reforms are equitable and effective for all students. Don't forget that I said areas undergoing structural reforms may be as a result of policies. They are being driven by policy reforms. And how do we now ensure that the reforms we are talking about are equitable and effective for all students? We can have this assurance when we carry out school mapping exercise because through school mapping exercise we'll be able to to identify areas that may require targeted interventions, special interventions, areas that will need support to ensure that the reforms are equitable and effective for all students. Now, um, like I said, areas undergoing structural reforms, they always, have cause to reorganize schools, to distribute school resources. So we can now use school mapping exercise to identify areas that require, extensive reorganization. The fact that we have policy that, is trying to bring about reforms within the education system, you know, does not mean that all the areas are equal. They are not equal in terms of access to educational resources. Some areas may require extensive reorganization, not just, creating one schools. So depending on the existing situation, there are some areas that will require extensive reorganization. So school mapping exercise can also be used to identify areas that are having challenges of structural defects that require school mapping to solve certain problems. When you carry out school mapping exercise, we have, you take a look at the school plans, the buildings, the structures. We'll be able to identify buildings that are structurally defective so that The possible problems that may emanate as a result of this defect will be nipped in the bud as early as possible. So, in areas that are undergoing structural reforms, we can use school mapping exercise to be able to identify challenges that may have to do with structural defects and that will require school mapping to solve such problems. Moving forward, the fourth area that I want to be speaking on is, those areas that are sparsely populated. Sparsely populated. When we say an area is sparsely populated, it has very uh, few people, very few people. And I don't want us to get confused with educationally disadvantaged areas. Even though educationally disadvantaged or backward area or sparsely populated area, they, you know, connote negative. They connote negative. However, the two are not the same thing. An area may be sparsely populated but still educationally advanced. That is it. We have some countries that are not as big as Nigeria in terms of population, whereas they are educationally advanced countries. I hope you are getting it. Because when we talk of population density, we are talking about the number of people in relation to the land area. So, an area that is sparsely populated is having fewer number of people, and therefore the population density there is very, very low. It's very, very low. And children in these areas, they may have to travel long distances to attend schools because the population there is low. Population density is low. So there may not be the need for the government to locate schools. One, two, three, four, five schools. No. So the schools there may be few in number, and this will now make the students to have costs to travel long distances to be able to attend schools. So sparsely populated area, within the context of this presentation, is not talking about areas that are typically rural or remote with limited resources and services, including schools, qualified teachers, and appropriate technology. So those areas, they are in most cases rural. They are in rural setting. They are remote with limited resources. Now, how can we use school mapping exercise, you know, to address the twin problems of adequacy of access to educational opportunities and disparities, in resource distribution. In sparsely populated areas, we can use school mapping exercise to identify locations for new schools and to determine the most efficient transportation routes for students. I just said that students in sparsely populated area, in most cases, they travel long distances before they can get to schools, within the area. And it is as a result of fewer number of people in the areas. So if we now want to uh, correct access to education, we want to, correct disparity in educational resources distribution, we can now use school mapping exercise to identify areas or locations where we can site new schools and what will be the best or the most efficient transportation routes for students so that they won't have cost to travel, to long distances before they can be educated. We can also use school mapping exercise to identify the most suitable schools for accommodating students with special needs or disabilities. Because there are few schools and because students have to travel to long distances before they can attend school, we can now use school mapping exercise to come up with the identification of areas that will be most suitable, you know, to accommodate students with special needs or children with disabilities. So in this regard, school mapping exercise is relevant to sparsely populated area to be able to identify the most suitable schools that will accommodate students with special needs. Now, we can also use or apply school mapping exercise to determine school catchment area. You know, when we started, I talked about school mapping having French origin, quartier scolaire, catchment area. So, in this regard, we can use school mapping exercise to determine school catchment area, to determine participation rate, improvement of participation rates, adaptation of school programs to clients' needs. So when we carry out school mapping exercise in sparsely populated areas, all these things can be determined. They can be determined. Determination of school catchment area, improvement of school participation rates, and adaptation of school programs to clients' needs. Now, the last area, diverse education area, where school mapping exercise can be conveniently applied, are areas that we regarded as densely populated. And of course, they are the direct opposite of sparsely populated areas. In densely populated areas, population density is high, very, very high. We have a lot of people in those areas. So we have many people in relation to the land mass. So it's and like I said, when I was talking about sparsely populated area, densely populated areas are not in most cases the same thing as educationally advanced areas. We can have area that is having high population and still it may be backward in terms of education. It may be backward in terms of education. What we are interested in when we are talking about population, densely populated areas, is just basically, and in most cases, with respect to population, not with respect to how sophisticated the areas are. So, densely populated areas are characterized by population density that is very high. They are typically urban or suburban areas with high levels of traffic congestion, high demand for resources, pollution, and other environmental factors that can impact students' health and achievement. Most of the big cities of the world, like Lagos, Nigeria, is typically an urban state. And of course, we have suburban areas within Lagos State. And Lagos State is having high levels of traffic congestion, high demand for resources, air pollution, a lot of environmental factors that can impact student health and their achievements. So schools in densely populated areas usually have challenges of being overcrowded, lack of space, high demand for resources, including qualified teachers and technology. And it is because we have high population. The school is the area is densely populated. So if care is not taken, if there is no effective school mapping exercise that will decongest students, schools in densely populated areas usually face the challenges of overcrowding, lack of space, and so on and so forth. Now, uh, how best can we use uh, school mapping exercise? in densely populated areas. One, densely populated areas, there is tendency that some schools will have been overutilized. So we can use school mapping exercise to identify overutilized schools, both in terms of teachers, staffing, and educational resources. And once we are able to identify overutilized schools, we can now create opportunities for resource redistribution. This is where the issue of resource rationalization comes in. So there are schools that are likely to have been overutilized. So we can now identify these schools through school mapping exercise and then create opportunities to be able to redistribute uh, you know resources among the various schools. We can use school mapping exercise to balance student population across schools and reduce overcrowding, improve the participation rate. Now, if we noticed at the beginning, I mean, during holiday, during holiday period, that there are some schools that are overpopulated, then how do we balance this? How do we reduce overcrowding? So then we can now say, let us, apply school mapping exercise. Once we carry out school mapping exercise, we'll be able to balance the student population across all schools. So where we have a lot of students in a particular school, we can now, you know, distribute them to other schools just to maintain that balance, just to reduce overcrowding, and of course, overutilization of resources. In densely populated areas, we can, as a whole, use school mapping exercise to expand the educational system in order to cope with the needs of the catchment communities. Schools are there, many students are there, so but we also need to, meet the needs of the catchment communities. So in the catchment areas, are schools, enough to satisfy the needs of the people there? If not, let us expand the whole educational system so that we're able to cope with the needs of the catchment communities, with the needs of the catchment communities. Um, in conclusion, the five categories of educational areas, the five, diverse educational areas in Nigeria and in every other, society, be it educationally disadvantaged or backward, be it educationally advantaged or advanced, be it sparsely populated area, be it densely populated area, be it areas currently undergoing educational changes or reforms. They are not mutually exclusive. They are not mutually exclusive. And every society, experiences any of these diverse areas, and that is what makes school mapping exercise highly imperative as something that must be carried out at the beginning of every academic section. Overall, school mapping can help ensure that educational resources are allocated more effectively and efficiently, which can help reduce achievement gaps and improve outcomes for all students. Improve outcomes for all students. So, uh, ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, thank you for your rapt attention. In this video, I have been able to once again underscore the importance of school mapping exercise in every educational system. I have been able to identify five diverse education areas areas that have their own peculiar characteristics that make it highly, imperative that we apply school mapping exercise in order to, be able to address whatever inequalities in access to educational provisions or disparities in educational resource provision and utilization. So we can see that school mapping exercise is highly needed, is very, very important in every diverse, education uh, areas. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, you need to subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell. It is very, very important so that you have access to my previous, videos, educative ones, then the ones that I will be releasing subsequently. Don't forget to also pass comments. Let us know your views, you know, about the lectures here. Let us have, an insight into your own contributions. Learning is a continuous process, and no one can lay monopoly to, knowledge. Don't also forget to like the channel if you are finding the video very, very educative and useful. Don't forget you can share with your students, your colleagues, and I'll be glad if you did. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Maruf Akwali Oladejo. I am from the Department of Educational Management, University of Lagos, Lagos, Nigeria. Thanks for watching.